There are places in the world where silence has texture, where the air carries the weight of unspoken centuries, and the stones hold memories that were never uttered aloud. St. Peter's Basilica is one of those places, and, at the same time, it is much more than that. Millions of pilgrims and visitors cross its portals every year. They arrive with their eyes turned upward in awe of the scale of the impossible rendered in marble, of the gold that drips from the domes like condensed light, of the feeling that something in that space transcends all human comprehension. And perhaps precisely because of that vastness that blinds through splendor, almost no one notices, almost no one sees. Scattered among the columns, embedded in the floor mosaics, carved into the surfaces of the altars and suspended in the vaults like petrified whispers, there are symbols, marks that should not be there, or that, according to some, should never have survived. Forms that scholars identify as echoes of traditions far older than Christianity. Geometries that reappear in hermetic manuscripts, in pagan temples, in rituals that the Church condemned to oblivion for centuries. How did they get there? Who placed them? And even more unsettling, why did they remain? The answer, like almost everything in this place, is not simple. It cuts across layers of intention, power, symbol, and mystery. And it begins, as every great enigma does, with a deceptively small question, one that, when asked carefully, reveals an abyss. Do you feel that what has been forgotten still calls out to us? If this mystery has already stirred something in you, stay until the end. There is something you need to hear. The floor of the basilica begins where the common gaze ends. While visitors tilt their faces upward, reverent before the grandeur of Michelangelo's dome, something waits in silence beneath their very feet. Marble patterns that repeat with near-obsessive precision. Circles within circles. 8 pointed stars. Forms that the Renaissance esoteric tradition called the language of the cosmos, an alphabet reserved for those who knew how to read the invisible. These elements are not hidden. They are in plain sight of everyone. But visible and perceptible are two entirely different conditions. And the greatest art of the forbidden symbol is precisely this: to exist in the full light of day, seen by all and understood by none. The story that begins to reveal itself here is not the story of a dark conspiracy, nor of a deliberate betrayal of faith. It is something subtler and more unsettling. The story of a language that survived its own prohibition, buried not in darkness, but on the most illuminated surface in the Christian world. To understand why certain symbols rest in the depths of the world's greatest Christian basilica, one must first understand the nature of sacred time. Sacred time is not linear. It does not advance from past to future like the pages of a book. It folds, overlaps, accumulates layers like geological sediment, and each new layer does not erase the one before it. It absorbs it. When early Christianity expanded its territories across the Mediterranean world, it encountered a universe saturated with symbols, temples with solar pillars, rituals tied to the cycles of the moon, sacred geometries inscribed in stone that the hermetic tradition considered reflections of the divine blueprint of the universe itself. These systems were not crude superstitions. They were complex theologies, with centuries of intellectual and spiritual development. Throughout the first centuries, the Church faced a choice that every powerful institution faces when confronted with the past: destroy or absorb. And the historical response was, almost always, a combination of both. Some symbols were declared heretical and erased with fire. Others were resignified, given a new Christian meaning and incorporated into the new dominant spiritual language. The problem at the heart of this mystery, is that resignification is never total. A symbol carries its original memory. Like a word that even when translated preserves the echo of its root, the absorbed symbol continues to radiate its primary meaning to those who have eyes to see. And the artists of the Renaissance had those eyes. The great names who shaped the appearance of St. Peter's Basilica, Michelangelo, Bernini, Bramante, Raphael, were men of an era when the boundary between theology, philosophy, and what we would today call the esoteric was extraordinarily porous. The Renaissance was precisely the period when rediscovered Greek and Alexandrian manuscripts reintroduced Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and Christian Kabbalah into educated European thought. For these artist-philosophers, there was no contradiction between being Christian and knowing Pythagoras. There was no heresy in honoring the golden ratio as an expression of divine perfection. Sacred geometry was for them the grammar with which God had written the universe, and reproducing it in stone and marble was a form of prayer, not blasphemy. It is within this context that the so-called forbidden symbols of the Basilica must be evaluated, not as evidence of conspiracy, but as residues of a worldview in which the sacred did not belong exclusively to any one tradition, in which the divine was a reality larger than any name or rite. Each layer that is revealed brings another shadow. Keep watching. The veil has not yet been fully lifted. The obelisk that dominates St. Peter's Square is perhaps the most literally visible example of this tension. Originally erected in ancient Egypt as a monument to the sun, to the luminous and creative principle that the civilizations of the Nile honored as the source of all life, it was transported to Rome by emperors who saw it as a trophy of universal power. Centuries later, at the heart of Western Christendom, it was erected once more, this time crowned with a sacred relic. The transmission was deliberate. The meaning was altered, or so it was intended. But the blood-red granite monolith remains what it always was, a stone finger pointing to the sky, reminding those who know how to listen that the human impulse to touch the divine is far older than any specific religion. There is a geometry that students of symbology identify in almost every sacred culture in the world: the eight-pointed star. In Islam, it represents the 8 paradises. In the Sumerian tradition, it was the ideogram of the goddess Inanna. In the hermetic art of the Renaissance, it was the symbol of regeneration, of the passage between two worlds, of the point where the visible and the invisible meet. It appears in the mosaics of St. Peter's Basilica, not once, not accidentally. It repeats itself with precision and intention in patterns that could not have emerged from a random aesthetic choice. Whoever placed it there knew what they were doing, and whoever approved it, because nothing in the basilica was placed without approval, either did not know what they were seeing or knew perfectly well. Both hypotheses are equally unsettling. The Masonic tradition, which in turn draws partially from Renaissance Hermetic sources, makes extensive use of this same geometry, and here begins one of the most persistent narratives about Vatican symbols. The theory that certain artists, architects, or theologians who participated in the construction of the basilica belonged to secret brotherhoods that preserved pre-Christian knowledge beneath a veneer of Christian orthodoxy. Rigor is required here. No document directly proves this connection. No confession has survived. And the temptation to see conspiracies where there are only cultural echoes is an intellectual vice that history punishes with ridicule. But rigor also demands honesty about what historical documents do confirm. That networks of artists, intellectuals, and patrons connected to Hermeticism and Neoplatonism existed and profoundly influenced the artistic production of the Renaissance, including papal commissions. The historian who examines these symbols is not faced with a binary choice between everything is a conspiracy and everything is an innocent artistic accident. There is a third path, the most difficult and the most honest, acknowledging that the past is opaque, that the intentions of the dead are never fully revealed, and that symbols, by their very nature, communicate multiple things simultaneously to different audiences. Comment what your instinct feels. Is it faith, or is it fear? The deepest answers tend to come from silence. Within the walls of the basilica, there are also what scholars call syncretic figures, images that combine Christian iconography with elements from earlier traditions in such an integrated way that separation becomes impossible. A figure that could be Mary or could be Isis, a representation of the Holy Spirit that resonates with the white dove of the Eleusinian mysteries, a geometry that is simultaneously the Christian cross and the Egyptian solar symbol. These elements do not prove heresy, but they confirm something that the history of religious art documents abundantly: that the language of the sacred never belonged exclusively to one tradition, that humans across different cultures and eras reached for the same forms when trying to express the inexpressible, and that those forms migrate, transform, and survive. The forbidden symbol, then, may not be forbidden for being evil. It may be forbidden simply for being inconvenient, for reminding us that the monopoly over the sacred was never absolute, and that the voices that were silenced found ways to keep speaking, carved in marble, hidden in plain sight. If truth touches the invisible, leave a sign of light, a silent gesture, but a powerful one. And so the fragments accumulate. Each symbol identified reveals another behind it. Each layer of meaning exposed uncovers a deeper one. Like archaeologists excavating a site where each civilization built upon the foundations of the previous one, the investigators of these mysteries find not one secret, but a sequence of secrets, each holding another within it, like boxes inside boxes endlessly. Every great spiritual institution carries within it a fundamental contradiction. To exist in the world, it needs the world. It needs power, resources, political alliances, and the language and symbols that communicate its authority. But by seeking those things in the world, it inevitably absorbs parts of the world that contradict its central message. The Catholic Church, over 2 millennia, has had to navigate this contradiction with a sophistication that blends the sublime and the pragmatic in ways that confound those who seek absolute ideological purity. And the Vatican, especially St. Peter's Basilica, is the most visible monument to that navigation. The struggle that takes place in these spaces is not the struggle that popular history imagines. It is not necessarily the struggle between devout Christians and occultism's agents disguised as servants of the faith. It is a deeper and more universal struggle. The struggle between the need to establish clear boundaries of the sacred and the stubborn reality that the sacred, like water, finds its way through any crack. Those who remain until here carry the weight of revelation. Which side of the veil would you choose, belief or forgetting? The councils and synods that throughout the centuries defined what was orthodox and what was heretical never managed to completely eradicate the traditions they declared forbidden. And this was not for lack of effort. The history of the inquisitorial enterprise is sufficiently documented that there is no doubt about the seriousness of the intent. But the suppression of a symbol does not erase the symbol. It transforms it. It pushes it down, to the margins, to the spaces of ambiguity where art, philosophy, and ritual meet far from institutional oversight. And sometimes, as in the frescoes of a basilica, as in the geometries of a marble floor, the suppressed symbol reappears precisely in the heart of the power that tried to suppress it, not as an open challenge, but as a silent and persistent presence, like a whisper that never stopped whispering. The artists who incorporated these elements into the great works commissioned by the papacy were, in many cases, men who lived on the dangerous frontier between knowledge and transgression, men who had studied forbidden texts, who moved in academies where Plato and Hermes Trismegistus were discussed with the same seriousness as Paul of Tarsus, men who believed, perhaps sincerely, that truth was greater than any denominational boundary, and who expressed that belief not with words, but with forms. For them, including a hermetic geometry in a sacred work was not betrayal. It was integration. It was the acknowledgement that beauty and truth belong to no tradition exclusively, that the divine reveals itself through all the languages that human beings have found to name it. Subscribe and walk with us. Each new video is a key, and each key opens another seal. But there is another side to this invisible struggle, the side of those who, throughout the centuries, vigilantly protected the doctrinal integrity of the institution. For these guardians, every ambiguous symbol was a potential fracture in the wall of faith. Every element of questionable provenance was a breach through which the enemy could enter. Not the supernatural enemy, but the intellectual one: doubt, heterodoxy, the human tendency to construct one's own versions of the divine instead of accepting the authorized version. This tension, between the openness that art demands and the closure that orthodoxy imposes, is the tension that produced the symbols that today intrigue researchers and lovers of mystery. They are not the product of a malevolent conspiracy against the faith. They are the product of a genuine, painful, and deeply human struggle between different visions of what the sacred is, what it can be, and who has the right to define it. And that struggle, like all conflicts that touch the absolute, never truly ends. It merely changes form and continues silently in the mosaics that no one examines carefully, in the geometries that everyone treads without noticing, in the symbols that sleep in plain daylight, waiting for the gaze that knows how to awaken them. There is a moment in certain ceremonies, a moment not prescribed in any written ritual, belonging to no known liturgical rubric, in which the sacred space stops being a setting and becomes a participant, in which the walls, the floor, the air thick with incense and history seem to breathe together with those present. In St. Peter's Basilica, that moment is possible with uncommon frequency, and it is no coincidence. The architecture of the basilica was conceived deliberately and meticulously to produce exactly that effect. The proportions of the main nave were calculated so that sound behaves in a specific way, so that Gregorian chant reverberates in a particular fashion, so that silence weighs differently than in any other space. The light entering through the dome's windows at certain hours of the day falls at angles that are not accidental. They were calculated to illuminate specific points of the space with a precision that today we would call nearly astronomical. This is sacred architecture in the most literal and profound sense of the term, and the tradition of sacred architecture inherited by the basilica's builders is itself a repository of knowledge that crosses cultures and traditions, knowledge about how physical space can be shaped to alter the inner state of the human being who inhabits it. If you have made it this far, you are already part of this rite. The simple act of seeing is to participate. This knowledge did not originally belong to Christianity. It came from the builders of Egyptian temples, who oriented their sanctuaries so that sunlight would illuminate the face of the god on the date of his feast. It came from the Greek architects, who calculated the proportions of the Parthenon according to a mathematics they considered a reflection of the divine order of the cosmos. It came from the builders of medieval cathedrals, who incorporated into their designs a knowledge of geometry and proportion that they attributed to Solomon and the Temple of Jerusalem. This is the invisible thread that connects the forbidden symbols of the basilica, not to a specific conspiracy, but to a far broader and older tradition. The tradition of sacred knowledge transmitted through forms, through stone, proportion, geometry, and light. The floor mosaics of the basilica, examined carefully, reveal a structure that students of sacred geometry immediately recognize. It is not decorative chaos. It is order, an order corresponding to specific knowledge systems about the relationships between forms and the principles they represent. The compass rose, the labyrinth, the spiral, the square, and the circle, earth and heaven, in eternal dialogue. A visitor who walks over these mosaics without knowing what they are is literally walking over a text written in a language that most people have forgotten how to read. Leave your sign in the comments. That is how silence becomes community. And here rests perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this entire mystery. The possibility that the greatest repository of pre-Christian symbolic knowledge in the Western tradition is not in some secret archive, in some forbidden document kept out of the public eye. It is precisely in the most visited place in Catholicism, open to all, trodden by millions, photographed ad nauseum, and effectively invisible to nearly all of them. The best way to hide something is not to place it in darkness. It is to place it somewhere so obvious, so magnificent, so overloaded with other meanings that no one thinks to ask what they are seeing. And those who know how to read, those who have been initiated into one of the traditions that preserve this vocabulary of forms, walk through the same spaces as tourists, see the same stones, tread the same mosaics, and read in silence the text that has remained written there for centuries. At the end of every journey through the corridors of mystery, there is always a moment of pause, a moment in which the accumulation of fragments, echoes, and suggestions demands that a position be taken, not necessarily a certainty, but an orientation, a direction of gaze. What the investigation of the forbidden symbols in St. Peter's Basilica reveals, when examined with intellectual honesty and without the anxiety of easy conclusions, is something more nuanced than any conspiracy theory or any reductionist explanation could contain. It reveals that the sacred is, historically, a space of constant negotiation, that the boundaries between traditions were never as sharp as institutions would like to proclaim. That beauty, when it reaches certain depths, inevitably touches something that precedes any specific name we have given to the divine. The symbols that persist in the Basilica, the geometries, the stars, the patterns that echo traditions predating Christianity, are testimonies to a reality that official history often prefers not to articulate, that the construction of the Western Christian sacred was a process of synthesis, absorption, and tense and sometimes violent dialogue with the past it sought to surpass. There is no proof of forbidden rituals being practiced in the underground chambers of the Vatican. There is no documentary evidence of a secret society controlling the destinies of the Church through hidden symbols. These narratives, as seductive as they may be, are products of an imagination that prefers the drama of the occult to the complexity of the real. But the real, examined closely, is more unsettling and more fascinating than any conspiracy. The journey continues. Subscribe and follow us. Each new episode is a flame lit in the dark. The real is that one of the greatest concentrations of spiritual power in human history was built, literally, upon pagan foundations. The Roman necropolis that exists beneath the Vatican, the circus of Nero, the memories of a world that Christianity transformed, but did not completely erase. And that the artists who gave visual form to that institution were men of their time, a time when the boundary between faith and philosophy, between orthodoxy and speculation, was far more porous than institutional narratives would allow one to suppose. There is something deeply human in the impulse to hide messages within monuments to the sacred. It is the impulse of the craftsman who leaves his invisible mark inside a cathedral that no visitor will ever see. It is the impulse of the theologian who, while commenting on a canonical text, weaves into his commentary questions that the canonical text does not permit to be asked openly. It is the impulse of the human being who, faced with the magnitude of the ineffable, realizes that no official language is sufficient and turns to the symbol, which has the advantage of meaning many things simultaneously without committing definitively to any one of them. The forbidden symbols of St. Peter's Basilica, if we can call them that, are not proof of organized heresy. They are proof of something more universal and more ancient, that the human search for the divine is greater than any institution that attempts to contain it, that the sacred leaks through the boundaries we try to impose upon it. That beauty, when true, carries within itself all the forms through which human beings have reached for the transcendent. Regardless of the name each tradition has given it, and perhaps the greatest secret kept in those stones is not any specific symbol. It is the very nature of the symbol itself, that strange and powerful capacity to contain the incompatible, to survive prohibition, to continue radiating meaning across the centuries to those with eyes willing to see beyond the obvious. What has been forgotten still calls out, and sometimes it calls from the most illuminated surfaces in the world. Write in the comments what the silence told you today. Sometimes it is there that truth manifests itself. In the next episode, the journey through the mysteries of the Vatican continues, and the secrets sleeping in the apostolic archives are about to reveal something that few have dared to investigate with care, a story within the story, a veil within the veil. Stay. What has not yet been said may well be the most important part of all.